Welcome back to Europos. This won't be a typical video because I recently appeared on Deprogrammed in London, which is kind of like a panel interview show. And I'm sharing some clips that I thought were particularly interesting from that. So enjoy.
Hello and welcome back to Deprogrammed. This is the New Culture Forum show. Special guest this week, Carlos Baruna Caluete, who is a writer whose contributions range from political philosophy to current affairs, the author of a book named Metapolitics, and the man behind the Europos, YouTube, and Substack. Carlos, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
One of your most viewed videos, we'll start with you, Carlos, is a deep dive on the Frankfurt School. I thought it might be instructive to read what I regard as the highly politicized Wikipedia definition of cultural Marxism. It says, cultural Marxism refers to a far-right, anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that misrepresents Western Marxism, especially the Frankfurt School, as being responsible for modern progressive movements, identity politics, and political correctness. Now, would you say that settles things, or should people still watch your video?
People should always watch my videos. A lot of these thinkers were very explicit about wanting to subvert existing institutions, inherited identities. Two in particular, the ones that I've focused on in the video you mentioned, Adorno and Marcuse, are kind of coming at it from very different positions, but the end result is always, break down to be free. What they're doing is trying to some degree, orient themselves in terms of the two great advances that we've seen in the modern era as they understand them. Marx on economics, albeit they don't agree with Marx on everything, certainly not on his sort of historical optimism. Adorno doesn't. And Freud on psychology, right? It's psychological liberation. Marcuse is very explicit about that. This idea that whenever you assert something, whenever you have a coherent form, you necessarily exclude something else. And that which is excluded is going to eventually be violated. You're eventually going to want to engage with it with hostility because it's outside of your standards. Adorno is coming at this through melancholy. He's talking about the tragedy of human existence, and you can sympathize with him. He had a difficult life. He emigrated from Germany in the late 30s.
He's Jewish, we should say.
Yes. And so he's coming at it as the concern troll. Oh, you care about beauty? You care about nation? Really? That leads to fascism. I'm worried about you. You shouldn't.
It's very Freudian.
Yes, in a sense. Marcuse even more so. But he takes a different tact, You care about beauty? Yeah. Patriotism? Oh, you're an incel, man. You're repressed. So one is tragic, one is moralizing, and the other one is more orgiastic. Sexuality becomes the sort of centerpiece. I've chosen them for that reason, because it feels as though their approaches are relevant to us today, that they kind of do the best job at defending very bad ideas. From Negative Dialectics, heady sort of term, it's one of the major works of Adorno, and there's a quote there that the point of social critique or the point of social thought ought to be to expose the disjointedness and the untruth of totality. He doesn't mean totality as in everything, an account of everything, a theory of everything. He means any totalizing idea, which is to say any idea that pretends to reconcile contradictions. Any idea that seems to be reconciling contradictions, that seems to be giving you a sense of positivity, of wholesomeness, is probably hiding oppression, and you have to expose it. And in another one of his works, which is very much worth delving into, Minima Moralia, we can talk about why he chose that title, but the subtitle is Reflections from a Damaged Life. Right, so it tells you where he's coming at it from. And there's a passage in Minima Moralia in which he talks about how even in your most tender moments, your moments of love, your moments of affection for your spouse, there is something there that's going to lead to terror, to violence. Because what you're doing is you're asserting your love for somebody merely because you met them first, or they came into your life at the right moment. Life is arbitrary. You have children, you love them, that's great. But the fact that you give them moral precedence over every other child, this is asserting the brutal linearity of existence. Sure, they're your kids, but why should that matter quite so much? And so there's a straight line between the tenderness you feel for your family and Australia not allowing non-whites into the country. That's what he says. That's what he puts it in terms of immigration and ethnicity. That kind of gives you an idea of what he means by negative dialectics.
Yes.
Marcuse is telling you that you ought to and I'll quote him as well, "You ought to liberate yourself from stodgy old norms and forms because they represent a system of control. Heterosexual monogamy is essentially good for the ruling class, right? Because it wants you to reproduce yourself and sort of not play, not experience life. You have to be productive. And play would mean, presumably, polymorphous sexuality." And he says that explicitly. The reactivation of polymorphous and narcissistic sexuality. That's where he wants you to go. In which we are at one with maternal eros. The world is the mother, and we're at one with the mother. We want to take care of the mother. We love everyone in that state. So you have to sort of return to that. In a sense, communism is a return to primitive communism, but in different terms. Well, he's recommending a return to that regressive sort of infantile state. And that would mean having a sort of entropic, so to speak, a diffuse sexuality. That's not really, it's not heterosexual or focused on monogamy. It's always the case, of course, that when you break a person down and they lose their footing in what we would consider to be a more organic, more natural identity, they're going to become more vulnerable to outside control. And when you break a society down and its historically inherited bonds aren't there anymore, you're going to have predatory elites that find it a lot easier to control people. A few years ago is that the Amazon-owned Whole Foods supermarket company experienced an email leak in which it was revealed that management was setting up a heat map, which is a map of all their different locations around the United States, in which different factors pertaining to the workforce of each location are being measured in order to determine what it is that's causing some to unionize and become a headache for management and others not to. Turns out the more diverse, the less unionizing, the better. So let's diversify. Goes back a long way.
Does?
Yeah, I was recently reading, and I wasn't able to track down the reference, but it's an interview of a coal mine operator from 1900 or 1910, in which he says explicitly to the journalist, we hire Hungarians, we hire Eastern Europeans and English speakers, and we hire blacks and we hire whites and we hire all kinds. We keep them mixed up because they don't get into any mischief. Now that's West Virginia coal mine. I mean, that situation ended tragically. They were very aware that diverse workforces are a lot better than homogenous ones because they don't give you any trouble, or they give you a lot less trouble. So it goes back a long way. Working class politics, I think, will make a return now. I think you've started to see that. I think Trump is an indication of that. His 2016 run was largely about working class degradation. You have to admit the degree to which class politics and economics require a defense of family and nation and all that. George Soros, his version of the open society is, I mean, he's getting it from Popper. He's not citing, any of the thinkers that the Frankfurt School is citing. But if you read his Open Society and you read his essays on capitalism or the threat of capitalism, he has an essay that kind of summarizes his thoughts on the open society. It's Adorno. I mean, it's negative dialectics. He says, the overriding fact of human existence is uncertainty and fallibility. And so you have to have a breakdown of the old certainties to get closer to the truth, a truth that is ever evanescent, but in order to be anywhere near it, you have to break down the old certainties. But what does that mean de facto? What positive structures do you assert within that? Well, he doesn't have, again, he's not an anarchist, and yet he wants to leave you unmoored from any particular value. Which is, again, that's pure negative dialectics. Does that prove that you can get to the same conclusions via Popper and via certain liberal presuppositions without reference to Marxism? Because Soros is not a communist. I think that if Soros is honest about his sources, then you can end up getting to the same place Adorno got, but via a very different route.